So I'm going to go ahead and start recording. I'm also broadcasting on Zoom if you want to follow along with that. Okay, so mentors, make sure I have a list for each of your groups. There's 3 like Uber mentors, right? Is that correct? Okay, so you 3 are in charge of getting me that list. And just put it up there in that folder that I had. That way I'll know who you got a chance to work with today for the homework credit. So,
wait, are we supposed to do that this whole time?
No, just today. I've been keeping track of it up till this point, but I didn't get a chance to play everybody's today and everything. So, what? Okay, so here's where we are, week 6. I want to do a little bit of house cleaning stuff, just to talk about some stuff coming up. One of which is sort of the rest of this process through this semester. So today we're going to go through the idle process, like my process of making a character idle. This is the only time I'm going to encourage you to not work in the pose-to-pose process, or pose-to-pose workflow. And I'll just show you sort of my way of doing that. Next class period, we'll go through the walk and the run cycle. After that, I think I'm going to combine jump and punch into one day. And that way, the following day, the 5th, we can have an open work day, right? The project that we do on Tuesday, the 10th, something else happens on Tuesday, the 10th. Anybody know what? It's not my birthday.
Is it portfolio review day?
Portfolio review day.
It's the 12th. It's Monday. It's the 12th.
It's the 12th.
It's 12th, 13th, isn't it?
It's the 12th.
This is the Thursday. Yeah.
It's the 12th.
It can't be the 12th and 13th. It's always on Tuesday, Thursday.
Well,
Oh, really?
Cher has it on the 12th. That's what she told us.
That's what's on D2L.
So what we always thought it was I always thought it was a Tuesday and a Thursday for the midterm one, and then the final one is going to be on the Thursday, Friday. So okay, I will clarify, make sure.
Yeah, it's 12th on D2L. Because if it's the 10th, it's still a Monday.
Yeah, but who wants to be presenting your portfolio on the Friday before spring break?
Not me.
It's still Tuesday, but yeah.
Anyway, okay, whatever. We'll look at it. I know it's that week anyway, right? So I did want to kind of remind you all that's coming. For those of you who don't already have like cold sweat nightmares about it. And I do want to encourage everybody to come out to those because they're extremely important to you to see how many of you have never been to one of the portfolio reviews? Really? You're in one?
Yeah.
Are you gonna be in one this
I'm
week?
gonna figure it out.
What was the question?
I mean, who's never been to portfolio review? You've never been to portfolio review? Parker.
Hey, Parker. We're out here, dude.
I thought I saw you last
How
semester.
is that possible? Huh?
I thought I saw you last semester.
Oh, I came to one for 5
Dang
minutes.
5 minutes.
Sorry.
Yeah, we're not gonna count that.
Okay, I have.
5 minutes. Okay, so don't be like Tanner and Parker.
Please
Go
don't.
to them.
Go to them before you have to be
It's very
delivering one of
important.
them, right?
Even if it's not your concentration, go to them.
Yeah. So, but you all, you'll hit the ground running. You'll be fine.
Will I be fine, Greg? Will I be fine?
What do I note in there again?
Just who you met with that
Okay.
showed something. So, yeah, maybe we'll see. Well, okay. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that I do strongly encourage y'all to do that. I'm not really for sure yet. Anyway, we'll revisit that. The other thing, anybody get a chance to meet with Anthony yesterday? He was here about the ID Tech thing. If you have any more questions about that, we got some flyers and stuff, and I can sort of point you to people who give you a little bit more information about that. Early semester progress reports are coming up in about a week, which means I will be getting on the grading and getting all of that caught up. So That's my bad. But you will hopefully have your grades for project 1 pretty soon. Don't feel like you have to wait for that though. If you have stuff you know you're wanting to revise, feel free to go ahead and revise those. We should have a revisions folder up in the network. This isn't the network folder, but if not, feel free to go ahead and create one, and I will look at that when I'm doing the grading if you already have something you know you're wanting to revise. Okay. So, if you had a game today that you were able to play, then you're in a good spot. If not, you should be doing some catch up right now. Because basically now we have 1 day of class pretty much dedicated to each of these animations. I'm going to combine one of them. But that means you have like half a week to do one animation. And they're relatively easy animations once you sort of boil them down to the individual pieces. So what I'd like to do is sort of talk about each of them, because each of these animations is sort of a lesson unto its own. And like I said, I'll probably end up combining the jump and the punch, because those are more theory-based or more like concept-based, and they're usually kind of the shorter parts of the lecture. So today, though, I wanted to show you how I go about making an idle animation. And since we have everything set up, I will just go ahead and start making my idle and then updating it in the engine to show you sort of the results of it, right? So again, I open up my same file, right? I'm going to go to my idle area. Now here's where you can have some options. One of the things you can do from this point on, if you would like, is we can start making an animation file or Maya file for each of our animations, right? So if I wanted to delete all the other animations out of this scene and let this just be my idle file, there's pros and cons of doing that. I'm probably not going to do it, but know that if you want to do it, that's fine to start working that way. But the biggest thing I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the animation I currently have on here. Right? I know my animation range. I have my Zelda character here. I'm actually just going to delete everything. There we go. Oh, it's not really one. And then I'm going to go back to frame 100, which is my start frame. Okay. So when I do my idle, you have this is like one of your chances to sort of try to explain some character or try to convey some character in a single pose. You remember BenBot, how you had to do those 5 poses for BenBot that each showed a different emotion? Did you all have to do that? I think you all have to do that. Maybe, yeah. Right. So one pose can convey a lot, and really that's what we're trying to do in our idle pose is get our character in some neutral pose that tells us something about their state of mind, something about their personality, something about something about them, right? Because right now I know nothing about her, right? She's in this very neutral pose, and on top of all of that, she's in her bind pose, which is really not a good pose. Like she's like her arms are kind of out to the side. So one of the first things I usually do is I start messing some of that stuff up. You know, I got auto key turned on. I'm going to go ahead and maybe break up some of this asymmetry in her feet, right? Get some rotation going on here. I want her to feel just a little bit cautious. So I'm going to push her down just a little bit on these. And get her like ready to run if she needs to, right? So here's where I really want to start thinking in terms of her personality or what I want her to go for, right? If I wanted her to be very like casual or relaxed, maybe she would just be sort of leaning back, like not concerned, right? That will tell you something about who she is, right? If she's out here fighting all these dragons but she's not stressing it, then you read that as confident, right? Maybe she's determined, like she's trying to rescue Link from the castle or whatever. And so for that, you want her to feel like she's really engaged in this. I think that's what I'm going to go for, sort of push her down a little bit and maybe get her like she's ready to fight if somebody comes at her, right? When somebody jumps at her, she's already ready to defend herself, right? One of the things that will tell us that is maybe getting a little bit of distance between her feet, getting her in a squat position, because then she can actually take off quicker, right? If you're standing upright, before you can take a step, you actually have to anticipate down first to do that. So I'll just go ahead and get her sort of in an anticipation pose. Right? Maybe something like this. So I feel like we're kind of close on the feet already. Maybe get her a wider stance. Something like this. Oh, I have not used this control of this character yet. That is probably not the control I need to be using. So I bet I need to be using this one. So I'll get her down here into this pose. I'm going to curl her forward a little bit. Probably these two controls will do it. That's getting a lot of it. This will get like some pelvic roll here. And to sort of get that like cautiousness, I'm going to go ahead and get her arms kind of in a pose ready to go. So really this is just coming up with my sort of my default neutral for her, right? This is actually in a lot of productions I've worked in, this is actually something that is an entire assignment. Find your character's default idle pose, right? Because it's just going to, like, everything else is going to build off of this. It's kind of a hard rig to select stuff on. I want to uncheck mine.
Yeah.
So I want her to feel like she's getting ready to take off at any minute. Maybe something like this. Get a little clavicle into that. Where's our clavicle? That's what these are. Oh man, she doesn't have that arm isolate. Yeah, here we go. Space, local, world. So I'm going to grab her upper arm controls, and I'm going to set that space to world space by setting that to 1. The reason I do that is because now if I move that clavicle, it stays in the same orientation, and if I move this control, it stays in the same orientation. That's really going to be helpful if you're using the Zelda character to have that set up like that. And something with the hand, I'll do that with both arms just while I'm thinking about it. I'll also have to remember to do that in my run later. But okay. That's not bad. So hands are difficult sometimes. One of the things I like to do is set up a way that I can select them quickly. So just like my Zelda character up here, I can do edit, clear all, and then just go through here and select all of my FK controls for these fingers. Call that, that's those fingers. I can also add these to it and make it all the fingers. And I'll probably do that for these over here as well. And although I'll go through and name them, now I have some buttons that allow me to grab everything, and then I can kind of curl them together, and then just use these individual controls to kind of get them in a better pose. So I want to get her in sort of this grippy pose, like she's making a fist. She also has this control that's kind of nice. Okay. So I like where that's going. Dude, this character is hard to pick. And then finally, I'm going to do a little bit of something with her cape. Just going to get in a pose. It's a little more relaxed. Now, so the last thing I want to do is make sure her head is sort of where I want it to be. If I have it up like this, it's going to feel more alert. I could possibly do like a roll it forward and bring her eyes up a little bit. Maybe even get a little bit of an angle on it. And I kind of want to think just a little bit more about contrapposto just for interest's sake. So maybe a little bit more of something like this. Okay. And I'm going to choose the entire character and hit S. So, frame 100, this is my character's pose. You know, looking at this a little bit more, I may lean her into this and push her forward just a little bit more. So she feels just a little bit more ready to go, and I may also sort of roll her up. A toe roll. What does this do? That's the toe roll. Okay. So now she's ready to go. Actually, looks like she's getting ready to take off at any minute, right? Okay. Again, select everything. I want to keyframe on everything on frame 100. And then my idle has to start and end at the same frame, right? So that means basically I need this frame all the way down there on the end as well. The easy way of doing that is to just copy and paste it. Right click, copy, right click, paste, paste. Okay. So y'all remember, I want to sort of change my viewport here in just a bit. Y'all remember animation fundamentals with the graph editor arrow?
Yeah.
So I'll do the graph editor arrow. So you weren't able to actually move stuff with the move tools. You had to edit everything in the graph editor, right? So what I'm going to do is something very similar to that in here. And it's not because you can't move it in the viewport. It's because moving it in the viewport is usually too much. Right? If you start setting keyframes on the character's hips in the viewport, the next thing you know, your character is going to be doing this in their animation, right? Just going to move it all over the place. And idle is pretty much going to have our character hanging out in this pose with just a little bit of like keep alive movement, right? And so I'm going to show you some tricks to this to allow you to kind of start generating that. Now, I don't really need my outliner right now, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. And then I usually, just so you can see this in here, and this works pretty well on the wide monitors too, I'm going to go to Panels, Layouts, and 2 panes side by side. Now, what I'm looking at now is my perspective view, right? And then over here, this is my top view, but I want to go to Panels instead and change this to Panels, Graph Editor. And so now I'll be able to see my graph editor over here and sort of work on my animation on this side. So I always have this set up as a default on my computer, but if I grab the curve here, you'll see that this range right here is our idle range. right? One of the things I'm going to do just so I can show you some more tricks in this, you don't have to do it this way, but this is actually a pretty beneficial way of doing it. I'm going to select everything on this rig, and I'm going to delete all those other keyframes out here. And then I'm going to save this as file, save scene as, and I'll call this Zelda _ idle. Right? And I'm doing that just so I can show you some ways of making this loop perfectly. So if I frame this up, there's my entire animation. So one of the things we've talked about before is sort of setting up our own shortcut keys. What we're going to be doing is adding some keyframes to this, right? So I can start my Translate X, and I want to add some keys in here to start getting some motion in these curves, right? So what I'm going to do is, under keys, I got this add key tool. I'm going to create a shortcut key that allows me to turn that on and off pretty quickly. I usually use T as the shortcut key I create, but you can do whatever you want to, or you don't have to create the shortcut key at all if you don't want to. But to do that, Windows, Settings and Preferences, Hotkey Editor. And under Choose Category, I'm going to choose Editors, choose Graph Editors, and it's right here, Add Key Tool. I'm just going to type in T and say Save and Close. Right? So the reason I do this is because now I can start with my Translate X, and I can start adding keys to this. Right? If I hit T, I can very quickly just start drawing some curves in here. Right? And when I do that, you'll start to see very subtly a little bit of motion there. I don't know if you can see that or not. Right? If you can't see that, that's okay. The reason is because she's only moving what appears to be like a quarter of a unit, right? There's 3 point whatever, and it's going up to just a little bit higher than that. So it's moving like a tenth or 2/10 of a number in the channel box, right? So I can keep that curve if I wanted to. I could scale out like this. But one of the things I can do is I can hold W, grab this, and hit R, and then I can start to scale that up. And as I do that, you'll start to see I get a little bit more motion on there, right? So you can kind of see her just very subtly shifting from side to side. So this scaling tool is really handy. Recognize there's no rotating tool in the graph editor, but there's a move and there's a scale, right? So if I want to move this again, I just hit W, right, and I can move it wherever I want to. But if I hit R for scale, I can click in the middle and start to scale those curves out. Right? So this is just getting me a starting point so I'll sort of see what my scale is. I think that's probably a little too much, so maybe something like this. So the reason I like creating it this way is that I can now just leave this playing and I can start changing my curve and getting a different result in the animation, right? I can start doing stuff like this, and then as it plays, I get a little bit of a different result. I can hit T again and add some more detail to it. If I want some of these like weight shifts to be slightly different, I could do something like that. So maybe that's what I'll do. Let's try like this. So it's a little much. Something like that. Right? So this is how I'm going to do the entire character. I'm going to go through in the same order in which I would polish this character or spline this character if I were doing a bigger animation. I'm going to go through each control of this, and I'm going to add just a little bit of movement where I need it. Right? Now, something I do want you to kind of think about, and we'll use this again in the walk, right? Is that this animation is playing from frame 100 to 300, and then what happens when it gets to frame 300? It just starts back at 100, right? So what you need to be thinking about is that means that the end of this curve connects into the beginning of this curve, right? And sometimes that's important to know, right? Because if I'm getting this, let's do something bigger so we can kind of see the results of that, right? If I'm doing something like this, right, then that loop point may feel kind of weird. So you feel like when it loops, what's your animation? You'll feel her kind of stop a little bit and then start moving again, right? And that's because if we were to look at this in the graph editor, that's what's happening, right? We're transitioning up, but then it flattens out. And then from here, it's flat again, and then it starts easing out of this. So what we would like to be able to see is how this curve connects into the end of this and vice versa. So I'm just going to show you this really quickly on a way you can turn this on. If I select my entire character, I'm going to drag select everything. I'm going to go to View, and then I'm going to turn on this infinity right here, right? So what we're going to see now is that this control, we can see this line that goes off forever in infinity. Right? And if I extend that out, this makes sense. Once we get to frame 300 here, right, she stops moving and it's flat forever, right? This is constant, right? That value that we get to at the beginning or end of this, everything before or after it is a constant number based off of what our last keyframe was. Instead, I would like to see this cycle. So if I select everything, go back to curves, and say pre-infinity cycle, and then curves post-infinity cycle. Now when I select my, my controller here, you'll see my translate X. Once I get to the end of this animation, right there, it continues to show me what the rest of that curve is. And in fact, if I can continue to scrub, you'll see that it'll play it as well, right? So I can sit here and watch this animation cycle forever if I want to. Really, the benefit of this, though, is to be able to fix this transition. I can now change that curve here. You'll see over here, let me go back and do that again where you can see the whole thing. If I change this curve here, you'll see it update over here. And so now I can make that transition happen more smoothly. This is going to be less noticeable in an idle animation than it might be in something like a run or something that has a lot of motion happening at that loop point. So trying to find something that feels pretty reasonable. Okay. In all honesty, I think I want more motion than that. I'm going to delete some of this. Control T. I want something a little bit more like, I want to feel like she's got some energy going on. Okay. So this is my stop point here on that control. Translate X, that's my character's side-to-side translate. I'm just going to walk all the way down all of this. So translate Y is what? Anybody have an idea? Mm-hmm. It's up and down, right? Let's try and see. So T, add some keyframes here, and we'll see. Goes up. Now, for some reason, I bet it's because I didn't have all of these selected correctly. Let's try this again. Select everything. For some reason, that wasn't cycling. So I'm going to select everything over here just to make sure. Select it. Curves, pre-infinity cycle. Curves, post-infinity cycle. Right. and then now we should see that cycling forever, right? And we can watch it. So she's going up at the beginning and then slowly settling back down. So in this idle, I may not have a ton of up and down motion. I may do a little bit. Let's see what that looks like. In all honesty, I feel like I want to do it more like maybe even a little more often. And then again, I can go in here with this, sort of offset that, or set this up to where that flows in more smoothly. Okay. So the next step of this, translate Z. That's going to be my character's forward and back, right? So again, I always just sort of tumble to the angle I need to see that, and then Control or T to start adding that animation in there. And so for this one, I may want to mix up that curve a little bit more and make a big sort of forward and back angle. Something more like an M shape. Okay. So we're getting something like this. So for the next little bit here, I'm going to be working on the rotations, and this is where stuff's going to start to get a little bit exaggerated. So I may have to go back and scale stuff up and down, right? So I still have that controller selected. Rotate X. If I hit E to see what rotate X is, where did it go? Rotate X appears to be forward and backward motion, right? So what I want to look at there is the forward and backward translate as well. Right? So if rotate X is that, translate Z is my forward and backward translation, right? So as you see, as my character goes this direction, they're going forward, right? And then as they're going here, they go backward. And so sometimes you can scale this up just to sort of exaggerate that so we can see it a little bit better. So maybe I'll do that a little bit. Let me grab all of this, scale it just a little bit, so I can see that forward and backward a little more clearly. And I can always pull that down later. But what I'm going to do now is do a little bit of rotation as a result of this motion, right? So as my character's body moves forward, right? If you think of this remote, the character's body moves forward, I'm going to drag the top of it, right? And then as she gets to that front leg location, it starts to move backward when I have it follow through. And that way we get a little bit of this going on, right? And we can use this curve here as sort of a guide on how to do that, right? So if we're moving forward, I can go to my X curve, hit T, and figure out this will be dragging it backward, right? So we're dragging backwards here. So you see that she drags backwards. As she gets to this point and starts to turn around, I can add another keyframe that has her sort of follow through. Right? So maybe something like that. And she continues backwards here. Maybe this is where she follows through again. Something like this. And then here, or follow through again, maybe. And so all of that where we talked about overlapping action, this is where we're kind of putting some of that into play. So you see, you kind of get that like swaying motion that's happening there. So this is something I use for a lot of stuff, right? Your character is, turning really quickly, right? And I want to add some drag in the arm and then some follow through. Well, sometimes I'll do that entirely in the graph editor like this, right? I look at what one of the other curves that is a parent of that is doing, and I, in the graph editor, respond to that to get this this overlapping arc happening, right? And in a second here, I'm going to show you how we can reuse parts of this curve that will make this really a beneficial tool, right? So W, I'll go ahead and adjust this. Adjust this. Not auto. So you see how loose that's making that feel? So rotate Y is going to be our character's twist. So I could kind of do that from this direction if I wanted to, from up above, and just sort of come up with some ideas of places where I would want this to twist in this direction. And I'm just going to do a few on these because this is not a really important one to me. I might do something like this. There we go. So finally, though, let's rotate Z. This is the side-to-side motion, right? And that's the first thing that we did. Remember this translate X? We did side-to-side there. So as the character goes this way, I could drag in the opposite direction, which is going to be this way. And then once it gets to this location, I could follow through a little bit, continue on following through. Through here. So we're just getting some kind of looseness to the character now that hopefully is reading clearly, right? Okay. Now here's one of the tricks that we can do, but you have to be careful with it. So I'm going to go ahead and save this one really quick. Go File, increment and save.
Now questions. Did you delete all the other animations?
I did, and the only reason I did is so we could see this cycle happening here. If you're really good at visualizing that without having to see it loop, you don't have to do that. And every project I've ever worked on, like you have different protocols. Like if you know you're needing, like if it's a bunch of run cycles, you're probably going to want to see that cycle happen, right? So I try to work on run cycles or action cycles like that in their own file. But what I have is the old file that I started with, so I can always go back to that for my run and open it up and delete everything but the run from it. And then I just have multiple files. This was the idle in it. And since I set up all the export options in each file, all of that is still in this one as well. I will just only export out the idle. Does that make sense?
Gotcha, yeah.
So you don't have to do it that way though. If you want to leave them all in one file, I'm fine with that too. This is just one way you can work with it this way. So I want to show you something that's kind of neat. This is, some people might think of this as kind of cheating a little bit, and it kind of is, I guess, but that's okay. Because you can't use this for everything, but you can use this to get some information for free, right? So we worked kind of hard on this root control, right? To get all of these curves, and those curves are going to sort of, or this motion on the root is affecting all of the torso, all of the arms, all of the head, right? So this is a trick that you can do if you don't want to, or if you feel like it's worth trying. What I would usually do is I would go through here then, and then sort of look at what my root was doing, and then just animate this reacting to it, right? So if I, for my character's chest to rotate forward, we're traveling forward, so maybe I would drag down a little bit like this, and then once you hit that front position, I would have it sort of follow through a little bit, something like this, right, to get that chest reacting in the same way. And this is going to give you the option to very, very specifically customize that, right? But I wanted to just show you this, which is pretty handy, which is instead of doing that, I can delete all of the keyframes off of this chest control. And I can go out here to frame 300, all of them except for the first one. Right, so hit W, delete that. Right. Move my time slider back to here, frame 100. And I can go back to my root control, and I'm going to try copying my rotate X curve. So I'll just select all of that, and hit Control C. Now here's where you have to be careful. If you drag select all of that and then click over here and hit Control C, I copied part of the rig. I don't want to copy part of the rig because that means I'm going to paste part of the rig here in a minute. What I want to make sure I'm doing is copying this curve. So you have to do it really carefully in the graph editor, drag select, Control C, right? Don't click out of the graph editor. Now when I go back to this control here, I can go to my rotate X, select that first keyframe, and hit Control V, and nothing happens. Let me try that again. I think I hit Control C by accident. Control C, Control V, Control V. Go. And that's ending on frame 300. When I frame that, basically what I just did was copy that curve from here on that rotate X to my chest's rotate X. And so now I have that same animation happening there. Now the cool thing is, since this is cycling, I could actually just grab that and have that whole thing happen 1 or 2 frames later if I wanted to, right? And so now I get that even more overlapping action in the chest. Now this may start to feel like a little too much motion in the chest, and if that's the case, I can just grab all of these keys and scale them. Right? So these are some tricks that are really handy for reusing animation. Now the reason this is cool is because like that, all of the body's motion is sort of originating from that root, right? Including like the arms, including the head, right? I can go in here and select my head's rotate X. Delete that. Go here to the first frame. Paste. You know what will work better is if when I paste, let's do edit, paste, and I want to change this instead of let's see, instead of merge, I'll do insert. I think it is. No, maybe it's not that. It is edit, paste, connect, maybe. Yeah. So now it's going to stick in my same pose, and I can still offset this even more. Right? And so now I'm getting at least that front and back rotation all the way down the character's head. If I wanted that to happen even more, I can really scale that up, right? So again, this isn't a cheat. This isn't like a complete workaround, right? As it is right now, I think her head's coming back a little too far. This is just giving me a good starting point. So I can pull down on this like this, maybe not have her head go up quite so much on some of those. I want to keep it kind of low on some of these animations. And sort of the same with her chest. I feel like these up poses right here are maybe a little too big. I did that backwards, didn't I? And yet again, like, it continues to be pretty cool. I don't even have to do this on the same curve, right? I've been doing it on rotate X, but in this case, well, it's still, it looks like rotate. Yeah. So I could also paste this into the rotate Z or rotate Y of my character's arm if I wanted to, right? Control V. And so, and I can scale this up. So now I got motion on that arm as sort of a starting point. Which in all honesty, that's probably too much. So I'm going to undo that and just manually do the arm. So I guess what I'm trying to say is keep in mind that once you get that motion in there, there's a lot of reuse for some of that stuff. Whether it's using it as reference, looking back at a previous curve and doing a reference shot of it, or whether it's actually just copying those keys. Now, for me, the copying the keys thing is only going to work in so many different places. I usually go ahead and manually do some of this, or most of this in all honesty, just because I want to make sure that I'm getting exactly what I want out of this. That needs to be on frame 300. Okay, so I will caution you on that sliding the curve thing. Your animation has to stay the same length. Like all of your curves have to stay the same length. And one of the ways you can test that is if you go back to this idle, right, the frames that we animated, frame 300 has to look exactly like frame 100. If there's any change, then that means we messed some stuff up. Like really, sometimes the easier way to do that is after you've offset, select everything and nail down a key on 100 and 300 and just delete the stuff before and after that as well. But you know, we're able to kind of go through this. This is where I go through that same polish or that same curve spline process as I did with any other animation. Start with the root, I work up the spine to the head, I work down the arms to the hands. And since she's not doing too much, there's not going to be a whole lot going on. Mostly it's just kind of keeping her feeling alive. But if you want to add a little bit of something, like maybe she's got like a little bit of like she's anticipation, maybe she's got a little bit of finger movement or something going on. Something else you could always add is a little bit of eye motion. Now I think I've talked about this a little bit with some of you, but eyes are interesting in how they move. They never drift over a long period of time like that, right? They never do that, right? What they will do is sort of stay locked in one place for a while and then quickly dart over like 2 frames. So that's 1 frame, so let's give them 2 frames to dart. So sometimes what I will do is go through here and create a bit of eye dart movement. And then I'll make it loop by copying that one, pasting it there. And then what I can do is copy all of these keys here, click copy, and just go through here and paste those a few times. And so now, just get this little eye dart motion happening, right? Now this is nowhere near done. I still got to get a little bit of something on every axis. And in fact, I still think that head's just rotating back way too far right there. Apparently I adjusted the wrong part of that. Apparently I needed the top part to be high and the bottom part to be low. Oh. So let's do that the other way. All right. So let's say we get this a little closer to where we want it to be, right? This isn't finished or anything like that. I'm going to go ahead and import this into my game to just see those updates. Right? So this is why we put all of that work in. Again, earlier, remember this was my idle, and that was my punch. My run looks terrible. Right? What I'm going to do is with my game exporter, I'm just going to check the idle. I want to make sure all of this is the same, so my export path is going to the same location, that name is still the same, and the export object set is that same group that I had selected before. But then all I have to do is export out my idle animation. There we go. I just want to uncheck that top one in case that's everything. So check that and hit export. Yes, I want to replace it. So it takes a little while to export her out, I think. But after we get this, we can import this in and just see how that's feeling. Right? This is the process now, as we just go in, we work on some animations. I keep Unreal and Maya open at the same time. I make changes to my animation. I export them, I re-import them, and I see if that feels better. We do that until it's time to turn it in. Okay. So let's see if this works a little bit better. And that's really what I'm going to be doing in class over the next few days, is just making these changes, exporting them, re-importing them in. Okay, export successful. I go to Unreal. I find my Zelda animation, and it's the Zelda idle. Again, you'll remember this is what the idle was looking like. I'll right-click on Zelda idle and say re-import. It's going to re-import all of that stuff. Okay, successfully re-imported. Go ahead and save that. And now if I go look, this is my idle animation. And since I updated that, now when I hit play, that's what we see is her idling like that. Now we're also seeing a couple of other things, like her little backpack is sort of blowing through her her cape and stuff like that. So even though I'm not really seeing that in Maya as, well, apparently I am. There it is. So I'm going to have to make some adjustments to that, just to fix that, right? And so this is one of the reasons we start testing it now, is because we're going to build off of that here in a bit. I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move this little bag off to her side a little bit, like that. And I'm going to rotate this out just a little bit so it's not blowing through as much. Make sure that is copied to there. Same here. And so now I can re-export and fix that issue. So, okay, questions?
Do you know any good places for like ideal references? Just give us an idea.
Oh, for idols?
Yeah.
Well, pretty much any game. Almost every game that you can play. Like if you watch some Let's Plays, invariably like the person making them really wants to talk about stuff, so they'll start talking while the character's just idling in a place. I really like it really depends on what types of games you like. A lot of good third-person examples, if you're wanting something more realistic, might be like the Uncharted games. If you're wanting something a little more cartoony, like the Ratchet and Clank games. But pretty much any third-person game, you should find some good examples of idols. Any other questions on anything? Okay. So we're going to build off of this on the run next class period. If you've already moved on to the run, that's okay. Recognize we may have to make some changes to it. I usually, to kind of give you the brief Cliff Notes version of the changes, when we're doing it in class, because it's easy to remember, I usually do contact down, passing up. For the runs inside of a game engine, I usually start with passing. So it goes passing up, contact, down, passing. Like that's the order in which the poses will be exported. So really it's not a big deal if you've already started posing that out, just move those key poses around. The reason for that is because it's going to transition from my idle to my run. And as you'll notice, her current idle pose is much closer to the passing pose than it is to the contact pose. We could probably also start with the down pose, and that might work as well. Okay, so I've exported it. I'll re-import my idle. There it goes. I fixed it. Save. And so now we can play it. There she is. And so next class period, again, I'll fix the run. Now, I wanted to show you one more thing. This is kind of a small one. Epic Games Launcher. I tested this out with another student earlier. Sign in later. Something that I would consider doing is going to the marketplace and finding an interesting environment for your character to run around in. Now to do this, you'll have to log in. I don't remember what my login is.
The Blade Infinity one is really good.
Yeah, all the Infinity Blade stuff is is good. So there's under free here, there's permanently free collection, and a lot of the Infinity Blade stuff is in there, I think. You can also just do free, it's this Epic Games content. So Infinity Blade was a game that, Epic was built by their one of their studios, right? And so all of these here, like this Infinity Blade Village, if you open it up, you'll see that you get all of these different elements here, right? Or if we go back, you wanted to try like the hideout, right? You'll see like some of these level elements here. All of these are ready to go, right? And so all you have to do is once you've signed in, you click buy, and it'll take it a few minutes to buy it. It'll add it to your little cart up here. You go in and you say purchase because it's $0. It's not going to charge you anything, right? Once you've purchased it, then you can. There'll be a little button right here or under your purchase, either one, where it says add to project. And all you got to do is add that to your, just click add to project. It'll pull up Unreal and show you your list of projects, and you just choose the one we're working on right now, right? And it'll add all of that content into the folders of Unreal. So I may try to actually log in. It takes it a while to download is the only reason I've not done it. So it'll add another folder right here, right? And if you go into those folders, just like if we went to, I don't know if starter content has any levels. Maps is a different type of. So yeah, here's some of them. Like these are all different types of levels. And so I could just double click on one of those. And so now my character will play in that level instead, right? It's just not got any collisions on it. Minimal default, if I hit play here, right, she's gonna play in this level instead, right? So if you download those Infinity Blade assets and add that to your project and open up one of those Infinity Blade levels, then you'll be able to play your character in one of those levels instead of this kind of dull gray room, right? It's really not that much work, and it does a lot toward making your project sort of feel a little bit more finished, or a little bit more like a finished project and not a test. So that's something I would encourage you to do. It just takes a little bit of time to download it and signing up for an account. So, okay, questions on anything we've went over today? Okay, so what I'd like to see, and what we're going to look at it for your homework on next class period, is your idols. So get those sort of polished together. We can look at just a play blast of that if you want, but if you have it in game, you can show it to people in game too, so they can tumble around in it. You probably will have it in game. I would recommend having it in game. And the other way you can show it off if you would like is just by clicking on your anim in here and letting people see it animate while you tumble around it, right? So any of that will work to be able to show it to people, but probably the easiest way would just be to go ahead and play blast it from a couple of angles so people can see it and just give you feedback on it. And that also gives you something to turn in for it. So, other questions, comments, concerns? All right, cool. Well, that'll give us a little bit of work time then. It's 1:13, so you got a little bit over, or a little bit under an hour left in class. But that's completely yours. You can use that however you want to, and if lunch is a priority, I get that too. But otherwise, I'll be around until about 2 when I have to hop over to my next class. So let me go ahead and stop this video, and then I'll upload it to YouTube, and then I think that was the order of the hands that went up, and then we'll start hopping around. So.